This is BBC One. Now, we cross live to St James's Palace in London for the proclamation of His Majesty the King.
Good morning from London on this historic day, a day of great change. This is central London. St James's Palace in the heart of London is just a stone's throw from Buckingham Palace, where thousands of people have made their way since the death was announced of Her Majesty the Queen late on Thursday afternoon. Queen Elizabeth II, the country's longest reigning monarch, a constant presence in all our lives. Hers was a life marked with selfless duty and dedication. The focus until now has been at Balmoral, where she passed away, and at Buckingham Palace, where huge crowds have been gathering. But today, the focus changes to here, to St James's Palace. The palace has been the residence for kings and queens of England for over 300 years. It was the official residence of the sovereign until the reign of Queen Victoria, when Buckingham Palace became the preferred residence. When the Queen passed away, her eldest son, Charles, immediately became king. And today, on this historic day for the monarchy and for the country, with solemnity, the Accession Council will meet at St James's Palace, and that is for the first time since 1952. There will be a proclamation today for the new monarch. Now, these proceedings have never been seen before on camera, but this morning we will see both parts of the Accession Council and the proclamation of the new sovereign. Well, last night the King addressed the nation and there was a service of thanksgiving for the life of Her Majesty the Queen. What will happen today is the King's first official event as our new monarch. Now let's have a look at where the events are actually taking place this morning, because the focus will be here at St James's Palace, which is located just off the Mall, close to Buckingham Palace in central London. It was originally the home of the monarch, but when the move was made to Buckingham Palace, formal royal business continued here at St James's Palace. The King is currently in residence in Clarence House next door, the former home of the Queen Mother, which has been the London residence of Charles since the death of his grandmother in 2002. In a short while, he will make his way from his home to St James's Palace to meet with the Accession Council for the first time. Now, once the council formalities have taken place, the principal proclamation of His Majesty the King will be made from the balcony of that palace overlooking Friary Court in the palace grounds. And Clive Murray is there for us now.
Good morning to you, Sophie. There's a little bit of a chill in the air here. The cloud of early morning has been shifting, moving above us, but thankfully the incessant rain of the last few days that greeted the passing of the Queen is no more, as we now look to the official declaration of a new king to be proclaimed in front of the world. And it will be in the building just behind me here, where that decision will be taken to confirm Charles as King Charles III and Crowds will also be allowed in here over the next few minutes or so. If I was to sum up the mood here, I'd say it's one of sadness, one of a heavy heart that the Queen has passed, but also a sense that people are looking forward now, looking forward to a future with a new king on the throne.
Well, what you will see today is not born out of law or any legal need. It is following tradition. This is something that has happened for more than 300 years, but it is something that we have never been able to witness before. The Accession Council is always traditionally held as soon as the monarch has died. And there are two parts to what we will see today. Part one, the council, will begin at 10 o'clock this morning, just under half an hour's time. And that will take place in the picture gallery in the palace. The king, though, will not be in attendance for that first part of the council. The first part is going to last for a little under 10 minutes, and then the proceedings will move into the throne room for the second part, and that is where the new king will attend. He will make his declaration at that moment. Well, last night the king addressed the nation for the first time as sovereign, and he paid homage to his mother and to her incredible lifetime of achievements.
In a little over a week's time, we will come together as a nation, as a commonwealth, and indeed a global community, to lay my beloved mother to rest. In our sorrow, let us remember and draw strength from the light of her example. On behalf of all my family, I can only offer the most sincere and heartfelt thanks for your condolences and support. They mean more to me than I can ever possibly express. And to my darling Mama, as you begin your last great journey to join my dear late Papa, I want simply to say this: thank you. Thank you for your love and devotion to our family and to the family of nations you have served so diligently all these years. May flights of angels sing thee to thy rest.
The tribute paid by the new king, King Charles III, to his mother last night in his first address to the nation. Well, I'm joined now by Professor Vernon Bogdanor, who is a Professor of Government at King's College London, and also by Robert Hardman, the Daily Mail journalist and author who has just written a new biography of the Queen. Good morning to both of you. It was quite a moment watching him make that address to the nation, very touching. His darling Mama he referred to. Just reflect now on the past 36 hours, Robert, and the huge seismic change that has taken place.
Well, good morning, Sophie. Yes, seismic, I think, is the word, and at speed. We knew this was going to be a fast transition, but I don't think we appreciated quite how seamless and how swift it would be. The king has given this a great deal of thought. Obviously, he's the longest serving heir to the throne we've ever had. But I think he very wisely and appropriately, he never really discussed his vision of monarchy while the Queen was alive. He felt that was inappropriate. So we were all left guessing. And I now think very rapidly we are finding out that he, for example, just the fact that as soon as he came back from Balmoral yesterday, the first thing he did wasn't to go and meet advisors and staff and whatever. It was to get out of the car before he even entered Buckingham Palace and meet the people. And the very fact that we're here today witnessing on TV something that's never been televised in centuries, I think it gives a very clear indication of where this is going.
And it is the king who has given us permission to do this. Already a very visual monarch. He is in full public view right from the start.
Absolutely. I think it will be a much more open monarchy. But you said a few moments ago it was a seismic change, but it's also a seamless change, which perhaps we take for granted, that there's no argument about who the head of state is. The new head of state takes up his office immediately on the death of his mother. If one lived in America or France, it would be quite different. There'd be a political debate about who the head of state should be. If one lived in Germany or Italy, when the head of state retires or dies, the political parties would get together to decide who the new head of state will be, and that involves argument and controversy. We're very fortunate, I think, in having a monarchy where the head of state succeeds immediately and there's no debate about who it should be.
And that is something that has just followed years and years, centuries of tradition, isn't it? Because it always takes place usually within 24 hours. The reason it is a little later than that today is because the Queen's death was announced after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and that is why we have been able to, it is taking place this morning, but it is something that has been laid in stone, as it were, for centuries.
Yes, the Accession Council takes place very rapidly after the death of the previous sovereign, but the Accession Council only confirms what is already the case, that the king succeeds immediately. The monarchy never dies, which is why the royal standard is not at half-mast, unlike other flags. So the key thing is there's no gap in the succession to the head of state, but the ceremony today is a symbolic ceremony confirming what we already know, that we have a new king.
And we saw, Robert, the new king arrive yesterday. He flew down from Aberdeen. He arrived at RAF Northolt, and we saw him on the tarmac there. And as you say, he went straight to Buckingham Palace, and he took part in a walkabout on his own. The Queen Consort was with him. But there we see there were thousands of people standing there, as they have been.
It was an extraordinary moment. I was there in that crowd, and the mood just switched. The minute he stepped out of the car, there you hear people singing "God Save the King." I mean, you know, that words that were last sung by the wartime generation. And as soon as he stepped out, as I say, there were cheers, and suddenly you saw people break into smiles. And I think it underlined what monarchy is there for, is that sort of sense of reassurance, that sense of continuity, and you know, that's how he will continue. I mean, as Vernon says, I mean, this is essentially symbolic, but these symbols at a time like this, I think they really do matter. They're very reassuring. I mean, for example, the king is a king regardless of whether he's had a coronation or not. You know, coronations come considerably further down the line than today's event, but you know, that's obviously an equally important part of our tradition, and these sort of anchor us in our history. I think these moments, while their legal status is sort of lost in the mists of time. I mean, they talk about the first modern accession council happening, I think, in 1603. I mean, you know, but nonetheless, the fact that it's happening and what it symbolises, I think, is just underpins the sort of the gravity of these days.
And the extraordinary thing about what we're about to see today, and for those people who are taking part, no one living has ever witnessed this. That is quite a thing, isn't it? The words that will be spoken are words that have just been handed down through the centuries. They don't change that much, and the language is old. It's not they're not modern statements, they're not modern words that are used. But no one has ever seen it before.
That's absolutely right. Of course, the last Accession Council was in 1952, and none of the Privy Councillors who were present then are alive today. And as you say, it's a very ancient, some would say archaic ceremony. But one great constitutional writer in the 19th century, Walter Bagehot, said, "The more democratic we become, the more we like pageantry." And that may well be true.
We will see a lot of pageantry today, that is for sure. Well, the official announcement of the monarch's successor is an important part of our nation's constitutional framework. But what is the Accession Council, and how does it work?
Today at St James's Palace, there will be a special meeting of the Privy Council. In general, the Privy Council acts as advisors to the monarch, a link between the head of state and the government of the day. At the meetings, tradition has it that everyone remains standing. There are over 700 members of the Privy Council, drawn from politicians, some of whom, but not all, will have held high office, and members of the royal family, the clergy, and the judiciary, all appointed for life. Upon the death of the monarch, there is a special meeting of the Privy Council known as the Accession Council. It first met in 1603 after Elizabeth I died without a child. The Accession Council made the proclamation that James VI of Scotland should become James I of England. Since then, as soon as possible on the death of the monarch, the Accession Council has met to proclaim who the next king or queen shall be. The Accession Council will now meet twice, as it last did in 1952. First on its own, then in the presence of the new sovereign.
It will be quite a moment. Well, we're joined as well now by David Olusoga, the historian, writer and broadcaster. Thank you for joining us. And let's talk more about what we can expect to see today. As I said before, no one has ever witnessed this.
Well, I think today is going to be a strange mix of continuity, tradition and modernity. This event's going to be televised, an event that hasn't taken place for 70 years, an event with, as you said earlier, language from earlier centuries, archaic language perhaps, in a building built in 1531. I mean, this is one of those moments when I think we're reminded that we are a very old country and that there are these traditions that can disappear from our lives for decades, 70 years in this case, but they are there under the surface to re-emerge when the time comes.
And it is a proclamation, there is a declaration. It stretches back, doesn't it? You really feel like you're sort of stretching back, you're touching history past, because it does go back to the times when there wasn't literacy, there certainly wasn't modern communication. And the way to tell the people of this country that there was a new king or new queen was simply to proclaim it to the town criers, that the people going out in the streets and shouting it.
It was communication old style, and it's why after the proclamation here it'll carry on around the kingdom in the way it always has done, where you have these sort of fixed points where the news would be spread and then disseminated through the counties. So it does, as David says, I mean, it's rooted in such antiquity that I think it just underlines why it's so special today.
Let's talk about the Privy Council, because that is who has been called. It's the first time that the Privy Council has been called, the entire Privy Council, since 1952. And yet they cannot all go. They're not allowed to all go because there simply isn't enough room. 200 have been invited or will be allowed to go today. Tell us who they are then, and tell us what their role is.
Well, the Privy Council is an extremely ancient body. It goes back to Anglo-Saxon times, and in older times it was a genuinely advisory body to the monarch. But today it's a purely formal body. It's composed primarily of senior parliamentarians. The two members of the royal family are also Privy Councillors, the new Queen Consort and the new Prince of Wales. Also senior archbishops, one or two senior civil servants, senior judges and some Commonwealth leaders. And the whole Privy Council, as you say, it only meets on this sort of occasion, but as you also said, they can't all meet in St James Palace or the floor would creak. So only very senior ones are coming. And I think there's been a ballot for about 30 places for the rest. And I gather some Privy Councillors have been asked, please don't come. And I think there's a bit of annoyance about that, but it is inevitable because the palace cannot contain over 700 people.
But their role, I mean, when you talked about from ancient times, from Norman times, but their role then was to advise the monarch, wasn't it? They ruled alongside the monarch, really.
Indeed. But now, of course, the cabinet rules, and the Privy Council's functions are purely formal and ceremonial. It's an ancient body, and it has no real substantive significance.
Okay, but we will see today 200 or so, 200 we think, Privy Councillors in St James's Palace, in the picture gallery where it all begins, all robed up and watching on, really quite, very significant, if not, these are not legal proceedings, are they? But an incredible moment of tradition, David.
It's a moment of tradition, and I think if you think a few days ago, our minds were entirely in the 21st century. We were thinking about the war in Ukraine, we were thinking about the energy crisis, and we're now discussing ceremonies that are centuries old, taking place in a 16th century building. We have gone through a sliding doors moment, and we're suddenly reminded that there are these traditions, that there are these layers of constitution and practice which can be activated. So it is very strange when you think how fast this has all happened, as has been said earlier, that we now find ourselves in this world of deep, deep tradition.
And yet our leaders of today are so keen to be there. I mean, there are now, as Vernon says, 720 Privy Councillors, or most of whom wanted to be there, and they've had to ration it to 200. But I mean, for all of them, this is a very big thing to be present at this. I mean, if they were all present, as Vernon said, there was a complaint a few years ago that if they all turned up, they'd need to book the Albert Hall. So they had to have a lottery.
But what a moment of change as well, because it's not just the new king. We're going to see shortly members of the Privy Council who include the new Prime Minister, who include the new Lord President of the Council, who is now Penny Mordaunt. People who have only just been put in place in the last few days.
Steep learning curve for everybody, I think.
It really is. Well, let's go straight to St James's Palace now and join Clive again.
Yeah, Sophie, we're expecting in the next few minutes or so something like 800 or so people. They're gathered, members of the public gathered just to my right down there behind gates, but they're going to be allowed to come in here into the forecourt for what will, of course, be a historic moment, to be part of history. And that's the whole point of the ceremony and the meeting today, to make this public declaration of a new king. And that proclamation itself will come from the balcony just up there behind me, with the French windows open, ready. And the announcement will come from the Garter, King of Arms. And that, of course, will come after the meeting of the 200 or so, as you've been discussing, members of the Accession Council, drawn largely from the Privy Council. And in the last few minutes, we saw a succession of ex-prime ministers making their way here through the court to go into the building, from John Major, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, David Cameron, Theresa May, and of course, Boris Johnson. And I suspect that there will be a lot of people here who don't have memories of what happened 70 years ago. This will be such a historic moment.
Well, the proclamation of a new monarch is an historic and often pivotal moment in the life of our nation, and it has been 70 years since the last proclamation.
On February the 6th, 1952, came the news of the death of King George VI. The end of the King's reign, the dawn of a new Elizabethan age. Heralded the next day by Sir Winston Churchill.
Famous have been the reigns of our queens. Some of the greatest periods in our history have unfolded under their sceptre. And tomorrow, the proclamation of her sovereignty will command the loyalty of her native land and of all other parts of the British Commonwealth.
Princess Elizabeth was in Kenya when her father died and flew home immediately as Queen. The following day, the new sovereign travelled to St James's Palace to meet with the Accession Council, where she made a personal declaration, pledging that she would always work to uphold constitutional government and to advance the happiness and prosperity of her peoples all the world over. This was followed by the public proclamation at St James's Palace.
Publish and proclaim that the high and mighty Princess Elizabeth Alexandra Mary is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become Queen Elizabeth II.
Since the proclamation of the Queen's great-grandfather, Edward VII, in 1901, St James's Palace has been the traditional home for the ceremony. The proclamation of his heir, George V, was watched by the King's sons, Edward and George, both of whom would become sovereign. First, Edward VIII, who abdicated after less than a year, leading to the accession of his younger brother, the Queen's father, George VI.
Our only lawful and rightful liege lord, George VI, God save the King.
St. James's Palace, where kings and queens have been proclaimed for hundreds of years, the rites and rituals of which will be seen and heard once again today.
Well, that will begin, that accession council, very shortly, in about 5 or so minutes' time, at 10 o'clock this morning. Part 1 begins in the picture gallery, which is starting to fill up now with members of the Privy Council, the people who have been invited. There they are, gathering in the picture gallery at St. James's Palace. And Vernon Bogdan will talk us through again who is there and what we're about to see in this part 1, because the king will not be there.
The accession council is composed primarily of Privy Councillors, and they are mainly senior parliamentarians, leading members of the Church of England, Commonwealth leaders, senior judges, and a few civil servants.
And we can see many leaders, former leaders, past and present there, lining up front row. David Cameron, Boris Johnson was there, Keir Starmer, and they are all members of the Privy Council by right, aren't they? If you're in the cabinet, you are a member of the Privy Council.
The majority of Privy Councillors are senior parliamentarians, past and present, and as you say, they are all there today. And it's interesting to contrast this with the film we've just seen of 1952, which was a much more sombre and bleak occasion, and of course it wasn't filmed then. There was a big argument then about whether television ought to be allowed to film the coronation, but here we have the accession council being filmed and being open, and this is a sign, I think, of the times, that the monarchy has to adapt to a more open and less deferential society, and we can see that here.
What we will see very shortly, in fact everybody's standing to attention.
Thank you very much. The meeting will begin shortly. Please make sure mobile phones are switched off.
So that is the initial announcement, just alerting people to the fact that it will begin shortly. But in a few minutes' time, what we will see is what is called the platform party, who will arrive. And that includes the Queen Consort and the new Prince of Wales. We're having to get used to these titles, but the new Prince of Wales, Prince William.
It is a process of adjustment, as you say. I mean, this has changed. I think things are about to start. As we see there, I mean, in the past, most people there would have been in morning dress at the last accession council, and before that in court dress, in breeches. And of course today most people are in lounge suits. It's just another indication of the way times have changed. As you said, Sophie, nobody's seen this before.
But it is a very simple council, part 1. What will happen is the death of the Queen will be announced. We will have what is called the accession proclamation, which is made without the King present, and then we will see the platform party who will all sign that. They will sign and witness that proclamation. The whole process takes about 10 minutes in total. After that, they will leave the picture gallery and they will all move through into the throne room, which is where the new King will be waiting. But really quite a moment of history there. They all are, front row. Boris Johnson, David Cameron, Theresa May, and nobody really knows what they're about to witness, do they?
They don't. I mean, after the last accession council in 1952, Harold Wilson, the future Labour Prime Minister, he said it was the most moving ceremony, most moving ceremonial he'd ever seen. He said that many years later. So there is a very human dimension to this. Once the monarchs, issuing stating the personal declaration, and then the Queen, I mean, with tears in her eyes, was saying, "My heart is too full today to say anything other than I will uphold my father's values." I mean, that's the human dimension. So as well as all the dry and dusty constitutional element, that there is a human core to what we're about to see.
The personal declaration, which is in the second part of the ceremony, will set the tone for the new King's reign. The speech yesterday was primarily a very moving tribute to his mother, the late Queen, but he will, as it were, set out his own position, I think, in the second part of the ceremony.
So what you're about to see is the royal party and the platform party who are moving into the picture gallery now. And within this platform party, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Lord Chancellor, Liz Truss there, the new Prime Minister, the Archbishop of York, the Lord Privy Seal, Penny Mordaunt, who is the Lord President of the Council, who will lead the proceedings today in her new role, the Earl Marshal, the Queen Consort, and the new Prince of Wales.
The business for part 1 of the Council. My Lords, it is my sad duty to inform you that Her Most Gracious Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, has passed away on Thursday, the 8th of September, 2022, at Balmoral Castle. I propose that, when certain necessary business has been transacted, a deputation consisting of Her Majesty, His Royal Highness, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Lord Chancellor, the Archbishop of York, the Prime Minister, the Clerk of the Council, and myself shall wait on the King and inform him the Council is assembled. I now call on the Clerk of the Council to read aloud the text of the proclamation.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to His mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, the Lords spiritual and temporal of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of Her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless His Majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. God save the King!
God save the King!
I now invite those on the platform to sign the proclamation.
So Penny Mordaunt, the Lord President of the Council, and the Clerk of the Privy Council, who are leading the proceedings here today, and the new Prince of Wales, Prince William, signing the proclamation, the accession proclamation that has just been made. He will be followed by the Queen Consort, both Privy Councillors since 2016. And now other members of the platform party, beginning with Penny Mordaunt, who has just taken on this role in the last few days, also adding her name. And the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. And he is followed by the Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell. I'm just going to bring you in here, Vernon Bogdanor, because you've studied this over the years. You've never seen it before. What have you made of it so far?
It is a very moving and solemn ceremony, rooted in the past, but a confirmation of the fact that Charles III is the king. It doesn't make him king, it confirms the fact that he is the new king. And as I say, it's a very solemn and moving moment, which perhaps many of us will never see again.
Indeed. And hearing, as we have done only a handful of times over the past few days, God Save the King, it takes some getting used to, doesn't it, Robert?
It still does, and I think it was very powerful when you saw all those former prime ministers who've known the Queen so well, all together saying, "God save the King," and also the slight tremble in the voice of the clerk of the council, Richard Tilbrook, there as he read out what will be the proclamation. I mean, people in that room are feeling very moved, and it's not surprising. And then we see, of course, there's the Earl Marshal, like everyone else, with black armbands. It's, as you said, I mean, this is what we've seen, no one's seen before.
Drafts of 8 orders of council. 1. Ordering the proclamation to be printed and published in specialist supplements in the London, Edinburgh and Belfast Gazettes. 2. Directing the Lord Chancellor to affix the Great Seal to the proclamation proclaiming His Majesty King Charles III. 3. Directing the kings, heralds and pursuivants of arms to attend at the Court of St. James to proclaim His Majesty King Charles III. 4. Directing the Lord Mayor, the Court of Aldermen and Commons of London to attend at the Royal Exchange to proclaim His Majesty King Charles III. 5. Directing His Majesty's Secretary of State for Defence to give directions for the firing of guns at Hyde Park as soon as His Majesty is proclaimed. 6. Directing the Constable of His Majesty's Tower of London to give directions for the firing of guns at the Tower of London as soon as His Majesty is proclaimed. 7. Directing His Majesty's Secretary of State for Scotland to cause the proclamation for proclaiming His Majesty King Charles III to be published in Scotland. 8. Directing the Clerk of the Council to issue circular letters for causing His Majesty King Charles III to be proclaimed, are hereby approved, and that concludes the business for this part of the Council. I now invite the deputation party to accompany me to wait on the King in the Council chamber.
The Prince of Wales and the Queen Consort leading the platform party out of the picture gallery there at St James's Palace, and a very short 10 minutes or so opening part to this accession council. That was part 1. The proceedings will move shortly into the throne room. The party now goes into the council chamber, which we won't see, but they will all move there and greet the new king. And that is part 1 of this proceedings. There is a lot of change now because not everybody goes into part 2. David Olusoga, your thoughts on what you have just seen? I mean, the language of it is from another age.
It is. I mean, it's a juxtaposition of the very modern and the very old. We've just watched it on television for the first time. It's as significant as the first time cameras were allowed in Parliament. But it is from a world of proclamations where the news of the passing of one monarch and the ascension of another is something that needs to be proclaimed on the streets. The word needs to spread. In the 16th century, after the coronation of a monarch, there was recognition parades. This idea that the monarch must be seen. I think this is all part of that visualisation of this moment of transition.
And the Orders of Council, which we saw Penny Mordaunt reading out, very much, again, something you can understand why it happened centuries ago. It is all about ensuring that the monarchy continues immediately. There's nothing preventing business from carrying on.
It's ensuring that these things, the minutiae, if you like, of a lot of the ceremonial of today and of the days ahead, it's given the ultimate imprimatur. It's hereby, it's official. We might expect there to be gun salutes or whatever. This is saying this is what will happen. And there'll be other orders in council. I mean, the Privy Council directs things like coins and stamps. I mean, there will actually be a lot of change for this body to authorise in the days ahead.
Well, the Privy Councillors are all about to make their way out of the picture gallery at the moment. John Major, Theresa May, David Cameron, Boris Johnson, Gordon Brown, so many faces from the past. I mean, people, as you say, though, who all knew the Queen, who all sought her counsel for years and years.
It's sort of vaguely reminiscent of the state opening of Parliament, isn't it, as the Commons move through to the Lords for another sort of sacred constitutional moment. But of course here, as Jacob Rees-Mogg, former Lord President, and new Deputy Prime Minister Theresa Coffey, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey. I mean, we talk about the great and the good. I mean, this I suppose is its embodiment of that sentiment.
And just to be clear again, these are the 200 who have been invited. There are more than 719 in total Privy Councillors. There will be a separation now for part two, because what I haven't said already is that the Lord Mayor of London and his civic party were in attendance there. They will now head off into London, into the City of London itself, because there will be a proclamation at 12 o'clock in the City of London. But explain, Vernon, the importance of the City of London, the Mayor of London, Lord Mayor of London being there today.
Well, the proclamations, as you say, they relate to a time of the past when we didn't have newspapers, let alone mobile phones, and that was the only way in which you could spread the news towards the whole country. So this is a very traditional part of the ceremony. But the Lord Mayor of London won't be in the second part of the Accession Council, which we're now moving towards. And in that, the new king will make a personal declaration, and he will also take an oath to defend the established Church of Scotland. He later, either at his coronation or at a meeting of Parliament, will take an oath to defend the Protestant religion. Now, these may sound very archaic and out of date to many people, but they relate to the political and religious struggles of the 17th century. And if you think they're out of date, it's up to Parliament to alter them. But the new king has no option but to make these declarations, which have a purely symbolic significance, because if, for example, Parliament decided to disestablish the Church of England or the Church of Scotland, he'd have to sign that legislation. So what we're about to see is very much symbolic without legal significance, but mainly traditional significance. So it shouldn't give offence to those who don't belong to the Church of Scotland or to the Church of England or the Protestant religion.
But we will, for that very reason, see a change of witnesses. So in part two, in the throne room, Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, she will be on that platform party. She will be there in the throne room as one of the witnesses signing that oath.
Absolutely. The oath derives from the Treaty of Union with Scotland in 1707, which brought Scotland into the kingdom with England and Wales, and it has some symbolic significance perhaps for Scots. I think it probably couldn't be abolished, the establishment couldn't be abolished without the consent of the Scottish Parliament, and obviously Scottish sensitivities are very much involved in this ceremony.
And now they are all gathering there in the throne room at St James's Palace, and it's very, very rare that we actually see inside the throne room, isn't it? Because it's not open, St James's Palace, to the public. But that is a room that has barely changed since the reign of George IV in the early 1800s. I mean, his portrait is hanging there over the fireplace. I think you can glimpse it. But a sumptuous room, spectacular, really, isn't it?
That very few of us have seen. A moment ago, we were looking at archive in the film of this same event in 1952. And this is a moment, these images are being imprinted as we speak into the national memory. These images will be archived, that will be part of the national memory. So this really is one of those moments when history is happening in front of us.
And the throne there, nobody will sit except for the new king himself when he signs his declaration and his oath. It is tradition that nobody in the Privy Council sits, isn't it?
That's right. It's a standing only assembly to keep things short. I mean, it's what it does on a monthly basis. I mean, it could be anything from legislation to do with the Channel Islands to charters of chartered bodies. I mean, it deals with a lot of the things that Parliament doesn't have the time to deal with. But today, it is at its absolute, the essence of what it's there for, which is to appoint our head of state.
And what we will be watching for is what the king himself says, how much he himself can add, how much the words are written for him, how much he can add himself, what input he has. We don't know.
Well, his speech will be delivered, as almost all his speeches are, on the advice of ministers. But nevertheless, I'm sure he'll have his own personal input into it. And as I said a few moments ago, it will set the tone of his reign, the atmosphere in which he chooses to become king. So it will be worth listening to very carefully, I think.
And while we have not seen what goes on before, we have read about it. And when the Queen, when she made her declaration, hers was fairly brief, wasn't it? She said, I think my heart is too full to say much more.
To say any more than that I will uphold, follow my father's work and govern according to constitutional government. She was very emotional. She was a 25-year-old who'd just flown halfway around the world in a state of shock and was having to do this. A completely different room full of very old, entirely old white men. That's all it was. And one thing we see today is that it's a greater diversity. I mean, it's still a very establishment-looking organisation for obvious reasons, but it is a very different complexion to the Privy Council today. I mean, there are many women there as well. But in her case, she was very young, they were very old, it was a highly charged emotional situation, and there were tears in her eyes. I think today it'll be more of a very sombre, but I think there'll be a much more of the moment feel to the thing.
And you can see, David, just how much our society has changed over the 70 years of her reign, taking a look at that room. As Robert says, when the young Queen stood there, 25 years old, it was men. Absolutely. Now, faces from across the society.
I think it reminds us just how long the reign of the Queen has been. The society of 1952 has so much changed, so much disappeared. And this is a snapshot of the journey that we've been on in the past 70 years, both in all the forms of diversity and, as you said, this incredible gathering of former leaders.
So we're expecting proceedings to start shortly. The King will make his declaration. After that, everybody will leave. They will sign the declarations in a corridor downstairs, and then there will be, at 11 o'clock this morning, a proclamation from the balcony of St James's Palace from Friary Court that we saw earlier.
And we see there also present Baroness Scotland, the Secretary-General of the Commonwealth, underpinning the importance of the Commonwealth here today. As well as among that 720 members of the Privy Council, there are 40 or so who are from across the Queen's realms, just reflecting and reminding us of the fact that today this is the monarch of not just the United Kingdom but of 14 other countries as well. And as the clerk read out in the proclamation there, the first thing we heard, head of the Commonwealth, that has already been decided. When the Queen came in, that had not yet been decided. It wasn't clear whether the headship of the Commonwealth, which is not hereditary, had been fully resolved, but that has That's been set down by all the Commonwealth leaders in 2018 at the London Summit. So, these are sort of small changes, but important changes to today's events.
And the High Commissioners were at part one of the Succession Council. They have now left. This is just the Privy Council who is called here now. But that will be very interesting to see, won't it? How the Commonwealth changes under the new king, what changes he brings to it, what tone he sets.
Well, the Commonwealth has really been the great project of Queen Elizabeth II. It's been the passion of her reign, arguably her greatest achievement. But this is a moment of change even before her passing. It will be interesting to see how many nations for whom this change, this to a new monarch, is long-lasting.
Fascinating watching everybody there, sharing memories, no doubt, catching up. And so many of them who spent a lot of time with the Queen, who as Prime Minister will have week in, week out, had their audience with the Queen and really valued that. They've all spoken about how important that was.
There are 6 former Prime Ministers present, and I think it's the first time we've ever had 6 former living Prime Ministers. There's been such a large turnover, particularly in recent years. But as you say, the weekly meeting is very important to them, because they say they can say things to the Queen they wouldn't say to their cabinet colleagues, or even sometimes to their spouse. And they know that it will not leak, and it's entirely private. No one else is present, and therefore no minute is taken of the meeting. And it does enable Prime Ministers to unburden themselves, and no doubt they benefit from the fact that the head of state has a different perspective on things and may say, have you thought about this or that? This happened a few years ago, it didn't work out well, perhaps it won't work out well today. And although the king is new, of course, he's got a lot of political experience. He has seen major politicians for many years. He may be able to point out things which occurred before, shall we say, the current Prime Minister was politically aware. And that, I think, is an important part of our system.
The oldest king to come to the throne, isn't he, in British history?
Previously, William IV. And just to think, the last time this happened, the Prime Minister was Winston Churchill, and most of the people in the room would have known Queen Victoria. It's an astonishing span of time.
And so part 2 of the Accession Council gets underway. The first time we will see the new king here at St James's Palace. Have the party of witnesses led there by Penny Mordaunt in her new role, who will start proceedings. The Queen Consort, the new Prince of Wales, and there behind them, King Charles III.
Business for part 2 of the Council. Your Majesty, to make your declaration.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is my most sorrowful duty to announce to you the death of my beloved mother, the Queen. I know how deeply you, the entire nation, and I think I may say the whole world, sympathize with me in the irreparable loss we've all suffered. It is the greatest consolation to me to know of the sympathy expressed by so many to my sister and brothers, and that such overwhelming affection and support should be extended to our whole family in our loss. To all of us as a family, as to this kingdom and the wider family of nations of which it is a part, my mother gave an example of lifelong love and of selfless service. My mother's reign was unequaled in its duration, its dedication, and its devotion. Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty, which have now passed to me. In taking up these responsibilities, I shall strive to follow the inspiring example I have been set in upholding constitutional government and to seek the peace, harmony and prosperity of the peoples of these islands and of the Commonwealth realms and territories throughout the world. In this purpose, I know that I shall be upheld by the affection and loyalty of the peoples whose sovereign I have been called upon to be, and that in the discharge of these duties, I will be guided by the counsel of their elected parliaments. In all this, I am profoundly encouraged by the constant support of my beloved wife. I take this opportunity to confirm my willingness and intention to continue the tradition of surrendering the hereditary revenues, including the Crown Estate, to my government for the benefit of all, in return for the sovereign grant, which supports my official duties as head of state and head of nation. And in carrying out the heavy task that has been laid upon me, and to which I now dedicate what remains to me of my life, I pray for the guidance and help of Almighty God.
I have with humble duty to crave your Majesty's permission for the publication of your gracious speech.
Approved.
Concerning the security of the Church of Scotland.
I understand that the law requires that I should, at my accession to the Crown, take and subscribe the oath relating to the security of the Church of Scotland. I am ready to do so at this first opportunity. I, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of my other realms and territories, King, Defender of the Faith, do faithfully promise and swear that I shall inviolably maintain and preserve the settlement of the true Protestant religion as established by the laws made in Scotland in prosecution of the claim of right, and particularly by an act intituled An Act for Securing the Protestant Religion and Presbyterian Church Government, and by the acts passed in the Parliament of both kingdoms for union of the two kingdoms, together with the government, worship, discipline, rights and privileges of the Church of Scotland. So help me God.
I now invite your Majesty to subscribe both copies of the instrument, confirming the oath has been taken.
A signature from the new king on the oath that he has just declared in front of the Privy Council. And now witnesses will also add their signature to the documents.
I now invite the witnesses to His Majesty's oath to sign both copies of the instrument.
And that will begin with the new Prince of Wales, Prince William. He will be followed by the Queen Consort. And now those documents are being turned around because there are other witnesses waiting by the side of the platform who will also add their signatures to it. And just to be clear, Robert Hardman, what we're seeing being signed here, this is about the oath to the Church of Scotland.
Yes, this is preserving the settlement of the Church of Scotland. It underlines the sort of difference in the monarch's role with the Church of Scotland and the Church of England. With the Church of England, that will come separately. We just heard there, in relation to this section of the proceedings, there was no reference to the Church of England. This is all about Scotland. Scotland is where, for the next few days, in fact, a lot of this, our attention will focus as the Queen, the late Queen, is brought to Holyrood House and then to St Giles's Cathedral in Edinburgh. This sort of presages a very Scottish dimension to this.
And that was indeed Alistair Jack, the Secretary of State for Scotland, adding his signature now. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon and Brandon Lewis has already added his signature to the document. You can hear the bands outside taking up their place, because shortly we will be going out into Friary Court just outside these windows, where the new king will be proclaimed publicly. The Lord Advocate of Scotland, Dorothy Bain, adding her signature to both copies of that oath.
There we see in the background the private secretary to the King, Sir Clive Alderton, and the private secretary to the late Queen, Sir Edward Young, standing side by side.
And that the Lord President of the Court of Session, Lord Carloway, who is the last, I think, to sign the oath.
Draft of an order in Council authorising Your Majesty's declaration to be made public.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council for recording the oath relating to the security of the Church of Scotland, to be transmitted to the Court of Session, to be recorded in the books of Sederant, and afterwards lodged in the State Papers of Scotland and in the Council Register.
Approved.
Draft order in Council determining the form of proclamation for proclaiming Your Majesty in the realms and in the British Overseas Territories.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising the Lord Chancellor to make use of the Great Seal for sealing all things whatsoever that pass the Great Seal, until another Great Seal be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising the Lord Privy Seal, if need be, to make use of the existing Privy Seal until another Privy Seal is prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Drafts of 3 orders in Council authorising Your Majesty's principal Secretaries of State, the Lord Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, to use the existing seals until other seals be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising Your Majesty's Secretary of State for Northern Ireland to make use of the existing Great Seal of Northern Ireland until another seal be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising Your Majesty's First Minister of Scotland to make use of the Great Seal of Scotland until another Great Seal of Scotland be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising Your Majesty's First Minister of Wales to make use of the existing Welsh seal until another Welsh seal be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising the public seals authorising the respective public seals lately in use elsewhere than in the United Kingdom to be made use of until new seals be prepared and their use duly authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council confirming Your Majesty's wishes in relation to the Sovereign Grant Act 2011 to continue the tradition of surrendering the hereditary revenues, including the Crown Estate, to your government for the benefit of all, in return for the sovereign grant, which supports your official duties as head of state and head of nation.
Approved.
Drafts of 2 proclamations. 1. Appointing the day of Her late Majesty's state funeral as a bank holiday in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. 2. Appointing the day of Her late Majesty's state funeral as a bank holiday in Scotland. And of 2 orders in Council directing the Lord Chancellor to affix the Great Seal to the proclamations.
Approved.
I now invite Your Majesty to sign both proclamations.
The continuation, wasn't it, of it's making sure there is nothing in the way for this new monarch, that business can continue as usual. The speed of this, though, is quite something, isn't it?
It is something, and I thought in the King's declaration, I mean, he was out of his way to emphasise continuity. That's what monarchy stands for. Everything I do will be following the inspiring example of my mother. He said, irreplaceable, he called her. There was a human dimension in there as well. He talked about his sister and his brothers, but there was business in there as well. Very interestingly, he alluded
and that,
to
Your Majesty, concludes today's business for the Council.
So the royal party leave the throne room there at St James's
May
Palace.
I now invite the deputation party and the witnesses to the oath to exit via the picture gallery and the matted hall. I now ask Privy Councillors present to exit via the picture gallery and the matted hall and invite you to sign the proclamation, which is laid out in the lower corridor. Thank you all for attending today.
And so that is the end of proceedings at the Accession Council, the first time we have ever witnessed what goes on behind closed doors. I was struck, though, watching Prince William, the new Prince of Wales, as he watched his father, because unlike the new king, he now knows what will happen to him when he becomes king.
Yes, I mean, of course, Prince Charles was a tiny boy when his mother was going through this in 1952. he was back at home, and in fact, hadn't seen her for days. And yet, as you say, I mean, there is the new Prince of Wales, getting a very clear idea of, this is how destiny is going to be.
Well, I'm joined also in the studio now by Elizabeth Buchanan, who is the former private secretary to the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall, as they were then, and by Lord Simon Woolley, who is the principal of Homerton College. Lovely to have you both with us. You both know the new king. You have had dealings with him. You have worked very closely with him, Elizabeth Buchanan. How do you feel watching him there with the Queen Consort? You know the man very well, and what a moment for him.
What a moment, but it is so emotional, and yet it is so seamless, and he just wears the mantle of kingship with such grace and dignity and elegance and humility. And I just kept thinking as I watched this, thank God we live in this country, and thank God for the new king. He is going to be a remarkable king. He knows this country intimately. He knows this country probably better than any politician, because he has travelled it for decades. He knows the world. He knows the Commonwealth and the realms. He understands the people, and he minds deeply about them all. And he will bring all that wisdom and all that experience to the new role that he now holds, and he will do it remarkably brilliantly. I have absolutely no doubt.
But what we must remember when we were watching him there is it is less than 48 hours since his mother died, and the private grief, he has had very little time to deal with that. It's very public now all of a sudden, isn't it?
It's very public, but do you know the thing about the fact all members of the royal family, but the Prince of Wales as was the king now, the sense of service to others. He knows this is his role, this is his destiny, and he will be putting before all else the people of this country and the realms and the Commonwealth. He knows the role he must fulfill, and duty and service are what runs through his veins, and that's what you have seen today. He is grieving for his late mother, and you could see it in his face yesterday, and yet he has assumed the mantle of kingship with such elegance, and there was actually no void. People feared that. There was a sense, oh my goodness, there will be a void. There was no void. It was seamless, it was perfect, and we are so blessed.
And Lord Woolley, I'm very interested to know how you think the new king will be as a monarch. Yes. You've had dealings with him in the past. You've spoken to him at length.
Right.
And it will be a very different reign from that of his mother, won't it?
It will. But there's extraordinary proceedings, historic, that we've just watched, and I feel humble just watching it, seeing it being played out with all the former prime ministers and really the whole world watching. And I think has been said, this sense of duty that the king has had for many, many years. And some of us, like Elizabeth, we've been lucky to see it up close and personal. And you see when he's in a room with maybe 150 people, he will go around to each one and make them feel the centre of his attention and important to that moment. And that is a sense of duty, a sense of purpose, which actually I think he's taken from his mother. And it's extraordinary to see.
And unlike his mother, though, he has waited so long to become king. He is king at 73 years of age.
Yes.
This has been a long time coming. So he has been able to watch his mother over the years, over the decades. He has seen firsthand what she does. The Queen, so young when she came to the throne and so unexpected. It is very different, isn't it?
It is very different, but I think it's a time to find his own voice. And I think, as has been said, he travels around the world, around the country, speaking with young people, with old people, with people like myself. You know, when we met, I was a political activist and talking about Black Lives Matter. And one of his aides, Dame Martina Milburn, said to the then Prince, I think you need to speak to Simon Woolley. And so, you know, within a heartbeat, I'd got a call to say that the Prince would like to speak to you. And I thought we were going to have a conversation on Zoom. But you know, it was COVID times as well. But no, he said, I want you to come to my house, Clarence's house. And we were due to speak for 30 minutes about really bridging that gap between the young and the old and black and white and the tensions that were going on with Black Lives Matter. 30 minutes we had scheduled. We spoke for over 2 hours.
Oh, really?
It was incredible. And like I'm chatting with you, it was on his balcony in Clarence's house overlooking the Mall. he leant over and he said, Simon, what can we do? How can we give these young people that have taken to the streets, how can we give them hope? How can we give them a sense of belonging? You know, and I'm a kid from the council estate, speaking to the then future king, and he's asking me for advice, and in that humility to say, I don't know, but if I bring people like you and have the conversation, then together we can make a difference. And then from that conversation, there were many other conversations. And I would say to him, look, you know, I think that you can be a great convener to a lot of good people. And he said, let's do it. And we went around the country, we had the conversations. And you saw many young people who, you know, might be fearful of meeting, you know, the future king. He would make them feel at home. He would listen to them. And great conversations were had.
Well, we're going to talk about more of that in a moment, but right now we're going to go back to Friary Court, which is the courtyard outside St James's Palace, and that is where the proceedings this morning now resume. Clive Murray is there for us right now. Clive.
Yeah, hi there, Sophie. The King's Guard and Band are in position for a performance a little bit later on. But I have to say, the atmosphere here is quite surreal. I'm surrounded by about 1,000 people, and you can hear whispered conversations, a bit of murmuring in the crowd, but essentially there's a hush. Listen. There's a silence. There's a sense of solemnity that this is such a historic and important moment that requires a little bit of quiet. And for quite a while here, actually, all you could hear was birdsong and the sound of the guardsmen's hobnail boots on the ground. But we're waiting for the proclamation. It's going to be coming pretty soon. And I've got a member of the public here, Anjna Taylor, living in Canada, who's come over and wanted to be at the front of the queue actually here to see the proceedings. Anjna, thank you for joining us. Why was it so important for you to be here?
It's very important for me to hear because the Queen Elizabeth, she served the country so well for so very long in a very dignified way. She brought the Commonwealth together in times when it was difficult, but she still kept it all together. And now I was flying in from Toronto on the day that she passed away. I was at Heathrow when I learned that she was now taken very ill. At that point, I was still in disbelief that it would come to her passing away a few hours later. And when I learnt of her passing, I shed a tear, for she was really a queen of all people. She was very neutral and very, very, very good.
But what are your thoughts now on King Charles III?
I think King Charles III is going to be a fabulous king. I do believe he is very much in touch with the people. I think that he was also very ahead of his time on saving the planet and the environment.
Okay, Anjna, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. We're getting that proclamation, obviously, in the next few minutes or so. And with that, it's back to you.
Clive, thank you. Well, David Olusoga is back with me, and I'm delighted that we're now joined by Sir Tom Shabir, who is the former CEO of the Prince's Trust and worked alongside the new king, as he is now, for more than 20 years, and worked a lot in this palace, didn't you, Tom?
Worked in that. He gave me that office behind with the crenellations. Wonderful person to work for. It happened by accident. I had a nice job being a civil servant in France. Someone told me about an organisation called the Prince's Trust, and they were looking for someone to be its first director. And certain trepidation turned up for an interview, as it was in the garden at Highgrove. And I was imagining, great formality. In fact, we had an argument. Quite a healthy argument about, whether community service should be compulsory for everybody, every young person, or not. Maybe it should be. I was quite certain it shouldn't. And to my astonishment and surprise, I got the job and started from scratch. A wonderful experience. He's an extraordinary man.
What kind of king will he be, do you think? Because you did spend more than 20 years by his side.
You hear a lot of speculation, don't you? And you read a lot of speculation about a person with strong views, fine to be Prince of Wales, not so fine as a king. he's absolutely clear about that, and I have absolutely no doubt. He won't be lobbying government ministers as being suggested. You saw him just now. He's a monarch. He's the sovereign, and he'll be just great at it. And the proceedings today, I'm so pleased. He must have been behind it. I knew nothing about it. Putting all that on television, which makes the whole thing open. Here I am. It's perfectly clear what my relationship with all these powerful individuals on the Privy Council and the people of this country, and he'll be great at it.
And what we're about to see now is the proclamation, which is going to be read in the courtyard there, Friary Court, at St James's Palace. It will be read on the balcony. We've seen the window, which is open. It's not actually open, it's been taken out, hasn't it? As it is for these occasions, because it is such an old part of the palace. It dates back to the Tudor times. So they physically have to take the window out in order for the party to go out there, the Garter King of Arms, who will go out there and make the first principal proclamation. Talk to us about the significance of what we're about to see, David.
Well, again, it is about making things public. It is traditions that come from a pre-media age, from a pre-modern age, where the transference of power, the accession of a new monarch, needs to be proclaimed to the people. So this is a very old tradition, but it's been matched, as I said earlier, with the very modern advent of a much more transparent monarchy. The TV cameras allowed in. So this is, again, that strange mix of the very old and the very modern.
It's a very wonderful palace, isn't it, Tom? I mean, it's private. We don't get to go in there very often. It's where Prince Charles, as he was then, lived for some time.
Where he lived, where we had regular briefings from members of Parliament. I remember those rooms so well, having to stand in front of the portraits with my boss listening to me, giving an explanation about what the Prince's Trust was about. Embarrassing, because he knew it better than I did and occasionally interrupted. There's a wonderful fireplace, which you won't see on the cameras, in that Tudor residence, which has an H and an A, Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII, a remembrance of the past, a rather tougher king.
And we saw earlier those wonderful archive images of the last proclamation that we have seen from that balcony, which was, of course, the Queen's. 70 years ago, though. We have not seen anything of its like since then.
70 years ago, and those archive images we saw earlier were modern for their time. That was a revelation that was filmed, that the coronation was going to be filmed and broadcast on television. So this ability to find ways of keeping pace with modernity, finding ways of keeping pace with the public interest in the monarchy, again, I think we're seeing that today.
But what did you make of just the language we have heard? Talk of the royal seals, the language that really dates back centuries, and hearing it today, it really does feel like you're touching the past, doesn't it?
Well, in so many ways, the past is part of what we've just seen. We're in a 16th century palace. The language about Scotland and the Church of Scotland is a reflection of the complicated negotiations that led to the Act of Union in 1707. In all sorts of ways, different moments from the British story intrude and make their presence clear in the ceremonies.
So I will tell you now what we are waiting for and what is about to happen. And in a very short time, in a minute or so, you will see state trumpeters who will move on to that balcony. They will get into position on that balcony, and shortly after that they will sound a fanfare which will announce the arrival of the balcony party. A royal salute will be sounded, and then at 11 o'clock on the dot, we think, these things normally run to time, we will have that official, the principal proclamation, which will be made there in Friary Court. It will be made by the Garter King of Arms. We will then hear God Save the King, and the trumpeters will sound the royal salute. You'll hear the national anthem, one verse of the new national anthem as well after that. And we can see them already there in the court, some members of the public. Clive was talking to some of them just a short time ago, who are able to witness this. But it is, Tom, a wonderful moment of pageantry as well, isn't it? You've seen that many times over the years here at this palace.
I've seen not quite as grand as this, but the changing of the guard, the ceremony beginning there many mornings, and people were much entertained by it. I also remember the last time I was there, we had in 2010 a sustainability festival, very much up the Prince of Wales's list of enthusiasms. David Attenborough was speaking right underneath those arches, underneath the balcony. We also had a sustainable fashion show looked at by many people. We had about 60,000 people there, I think.
It is very much the seat.
The mayor of London, Boris Johnson.
But that palace is very much the seat of. It's been used for a lot of official functions over the years.
Always used for these official functions and very busy. Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme often did their ceremonies there, etc., etc., etc.
Band of the Coldstream Guards there, and the balcony party now. The trumpeters, state trumpeters, moving into position, as they have done over centuries, more than 300 years. This has taken place every time we have had a new king or queen. So, Barry Court, the St James's Palace detachment of the King's Guard, alongside the band of the Coldstream Guards. And on the balcony there, the trumpeters, the state trumpeters of the Household Cavalry. The Garter King of Arms is accompanied by the Earl Marshal and other officers of arms, and the Sergeant at Arms will make the first and principal proclamation. David Vines White, the Garter King of Arms, who will shortly speak. And the crowd's there, their arms aloft with the camera phones, waiting to catch this moment. Robert Hardman is with me again. It will be a very simple moment, but it is a highly significant one.
Very significant. What we are witnessing here is royal communications circa 1400, and some things don't change.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to his mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, the Lords Spiritual and Temporal of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of Her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III. By the grace of God, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless his majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. Given at St. James's Palace this 10th day of September in the year of our Lord, 2022. God save the King! Three cheers for His Majesty the King. Hip, hip! Hooray! Hip, hip! Hooray! Hip, hip! Hooray!
King's Guard, will replace Pictet. Replace! Pictet!
And so the balcony party go back inside St James's Palace through the opening that has been created for them by literally removing the window, Robert Hardman. That was quite a moment, wasn't it?
That really was. I mean, there we had Garter King of Arms doing what Garter King of Arms has done for centuries. We just saw a piece of British Army drill you very rarely see of the Coldstream Guards there doing a remove headdress and 3 cheers while armed. I mean, sometimes you see that on parades without weapons, but beautifully done. And I thought what was so telling there was the way this event is echoing beyond these ancient walls. You could hear the crowds out in the Mall, many of whom will be following this on their phones, on TV and radio, and the cheers echoing. It wasn't just 3 cheers here in St James's Palace. But I think everyone is just thrilled, really, to be seeing and taking part in something that hitherto was off limits, except to a handful of very elderly men.
And very moving for you, Elizabeth Buchanan. I know you worked so closely with the then Prince Charles. I could tell, watching you in the studio here at that moment, it was quite a moment for you personally as well, to see your old boss.
It is an extraordinary moment.
Proclaimed king.
After his extraordinary decades serving this nation as Prince of Wales, now to assume the role of king. And what also struck me, looking at the crowds there, the different age groups that are there, and the solemnity of this moment, also combined with a very personal nature, the things that he is speaking about his mother, about his wife, about his sister, his brothers. And this is something about the Prince of Wales. He is able to operate at an Olympian height, often a global. He's talking about climate change, these big issues of the day. And yet he's also focused on people and individuals. And I can remember an event when we were in Wales once. I think it was the time of Prince William's 21st birthday. And we did a tour up there. And he met a lady in the crowd who had just been diagnosed with cancer. And he summoned me over and he said, "Elizabeth, please, this is Mrs. Jones. I've changed her name. Please can you make sure that she receives help from the Bristol Cancer Help Centre, which is one of his patronages, to go alongside her very intensive therapy." I did all that. 2 weeks later, he's about to make a speech in the European Parliament. I'm drafting that speech. It's late at night. The phone rings. "Elizabeth, yes, Your Royal Highness. How is Mrs. Jones?" And I'm going, I'm writing a speech for the European Parliament. He wanted to know how Mrs. Jones was. He has an elephantine memory. He has an elephantine memory, which is before poor private secretaries.
Now, just as all that was happening, there were also more gun salutes. There were 96 rounds fired yesterday following the death of the Queen, but these were the ones that were fired yesterday in London and at saluting stations around the world, indeed. And then today, the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery began firing their guns to mark the accession of His Majesty the King. At the moment that principal proclamation began, the King's troops firing 41 guns in Hyde Park. The Honourable Artillery Company fired 62 guns at the Tower of London. So that all happening at the same time at 11 o'clock as the proclamation, the principal proclamation, was read out there at St James's Palace, Edinburgh, as you can see there, Edinburgh Castle, where those guns were also fired. It was extraordinary, Robert Hardman, watching that as well, and hearing the crowd and hearing the God Save the King. It is still very strange to hear, isn't it? Because it's something that you hear, I mean, in archive, in black and white films, in something for 70 years we have not heard. And here we are, less than 2 days after the Queen's death, and it has changed.
It's changing, and we are getting used to it. It'll still take some getting used to. Obviously, things like the coinage and the stamps and the banknotes, that's all to come. But it just underpins the swiftness of transition. The fact that we just go from reign to reign without a breath. I think today what we saw is the way that the King wants to affect that change. As swiftly as possible. I mean, monarchy is all about continuity, but we're coming to terms with it. There was the same sense, actually, when the Queen came to the throne in 1952, Winston Churchill, then Prime Minister, he described his thrill. He said, "I, who took my first military commission under Queen Victoria, I rejoice in saying once again, God save the Queen." They found it quite extraordinary saying God save the Queen back in the 50s. It took a while to get used to. People kept talking about the King, sorry, the Queen. And the same will happen now. We will not say God save the Queen for probably at least another century, given the line of succession. We'll get used to it soon enough. But it just shows, as I say, the way in which continuity is all. We have so much instability in the world. The last thing we need is any dithering when it comes to our monarchy.
Well, let's go into St James's Palace now. Clive is there. He witnessed, obviously, the proclamation from the balcony at St James's Palace and joins us now. Clive.
Yeah, hi there, Sophie. An ancient ceremony inside the building, just over there, but out here it was all about selfie sticks and mobile phones. And there's about 1,000 people here, and as soon as the trumpeters came out on the balcony just before the proclamation, a huge ooh went right through the crowd. Everyone ready for that proclamation of a new king. And I have to say, I got my phone out too, as along with everybody else, including Sarah Bradley, who's with me. Sarah, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Why was it important for you to be here today?
I think yesterday I spent the whole of the day in front of the television mourning the loss of an amazing head of our monarchy, and 7 decades of her loyalty to us was incredibly moving. So today I really felt I wanted to come and be a part of this momentous day, a part of history, really.
And your thoughts on the new king and the challenges that he faces, perhaps?
I think he is going to be an incredible king. I think he has planned for this day for the whole of his life, and I think he has such support around him. I think the Queen Consort Camilla is going to be a wonderful right-hand lady supporting him, and also William is there for him, and he's got a lot of challenges ahead of him, and I think he doesn't underestimate that for 1 minute. I think he will take it all in his stride, and I think he would just be incredible.
Okay, Sarah, thank you. Important to remember, I'm not sure what the alchemy is exactly, when what was Prince Charles suddenly became king on the death of his mother. The coronation at some point will happen. That is mainly a religious ceremony, but this is the public declaration of the fact that he's king. Sophie.
Thank you. And a lot of focus, obviously, on the new king this morning. But we've also seen the Queen Consort, and it is going to change his life dramatically. It will also change Camilla's life dramatically. How do you think she will deal with that change?
She'll do it quite beautifully. It's extraordinary. They've been married for 17 years, and the Queen Consort came from a very normal background, and she stepped up and into this role with extraordinary grace and dignity.
Because it's not been an easy...
It has not been easy for her, and it's all members of the royal family. Times are tough sometimes. They put their head down and they just get on with it. And she did that. It took courage. It really took courage, and she did it beautifully. And now they are such a joyful couple together, and it's wonderful. They need each other. You look back at monarchs of the past. George VI had Queen Elizabeth, as we knew, the Queen Mother, and the Queen had the Duke of Edinburgh. And we now have this remarkable person who will sit alongside in partnership with, and they laugh together. They can see the silly things that happen. They love nothing more than silly things going a bit wrong. It just gives an opportunity to laugh and let your hair down at the end of the day. And they are a wonderful partnership and a wonderful team. And the burdens will be heavy for both of them, and they will need each other. And they also, of course, then now have the new Prince of Wales and the Princess of Wales, who will be equally supportive. It's a wonderful and strong family unit and connection, and we are secure in the future. What a lucky country we are.
He stressed, the new king has stressed on the 2 occasions we've heard him speak, he's spoken specifically about his wife, hasn't he, and about his need for her to be there alongside him. It will be a difficult challenge for her as well, though, won't it?
It certainly will. I think it was so important that on her on Accession Day this year, on the anniversary of the Queen coming to the throne, she issued that statement, a very important statement in which she said, "It's my sincere wish that Camilla should become Queen Consort. Up until that point, she was going to be called Princess Consort. And as Elizabeth said, the Queen understood the importance of having someone really solid at your side in these difficult moments. She saw how important her mother was to her father. She fully understood how, and said on many occasions, how important Prince Philip was to her. To have a successful monarch, you've really got to have a partnership. And so the Queen could see the importance of that, and the importance that that her daughter-in-law should be Queen. And she said it, and it was remarkable how it was just done there and then. It was a sincere wish of the Queen on her accession day, and now the Queen Consort is the Queen Consort, and we will start calling her Her Majesty.
But unlike Charles, she has not been born into this, and she is a very private person. She has been for a long time, and she's certainly. She's kept her place apart as well, hasn't she? She's needed her own space, which presumably will shrink a lot now. She's much more in the public eye.
It will shrink. It will shrink. But it's a partnership. She's developed her own extraordinary interest. She's done an enormous amount of good on domestic violence, on reading, really important issues that she has dragged from the fringes into the mainstream of public life. And that is terribly important. And therefore, together, they will be such a powerful force for good. They have been, and they will continue to be, and she will bear this burden incredibly well. It is a burden, but she will bear it well. And 17 years of preparation. She knew this was coming in some form or other, and it is so right that she is now Her Majesty, the Queen Consort.
So now the proceedings move away from St James's Palace. We won't see the royal couple again, I think, today. They have plenty of meetings, though, ahead, don't they, at Buckingham Palace?
Well, yes, and I think, again, we may get an indication of the different nature of this new reign, because the King this afternoon at the Palace, he meets the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, and the opposition as well. And we understand that footage of those meetings will be made available, and that did not happen in 1952. So we are seeing all the time, just gradually, there is a slightly different way of doing things. I mean, as the King said in his declaration, he absolutely intends to follow his irreplaceable mother's example, but that doesn't mean you can't sort of do it in a different way. And we're going to see that.
In the meantime, we have more proclamations, because it began this morning, the principal proclamation at St James's Palace. That will now move to the City of London. So we saw before the Lord Mayor of London and his City Civic Party, who were there at part one of the Accession Council this morning. They have all now travelled to Mansion House, which is the Lord Mayor's residence, his official residence, and also his place of work. And shortly, they will process across to the Royal Exchange, a very short distance in the heart of the City of London. And that is where the next proclamation is going to be made, and that is at 12 o'clock. Sonali Shah is there for us now, and she can explain it all. Sonali.
Sophie, yes, welcome to the Royal Exchange in, as you say, the very heart of the City of London, where crowds are gathering. There is now a genuine buzz in the air as more and more people come here knowing what they're about to witness. They are preparing themselves to witness the proclamation being delivered here in about 45 minutes' time. And it is significant that after that principal proclamation, one of the next locations is here in the City of London, because historically a new monarch wouldn't have been able to rule successfully without the support of the City of London and its people. It was thought very important that people here knew what was going on, and that is why people have gathered here today. You can see some of them with their heads in their phones watching proceedings elsewhere, and then they want to witness things here. That proclamation will be delivered on the steps of the Royal Exchange behind me. Now, when people talk about the City of London, that may be the image that is conjured up, but in many aspects, some of the buildings around the Royal Exchange are the ones that are more famous. Mansion House, as you mentioned, the home and office of the Lord Mayor, the Bank of England just behind me. But actually, when the Royal Exchange was created in the 16th century, it was meant to be this central hub of trading. Merchants from all over the world would come here to do their business. It was once known as the Eye of London, the place to be and the place to be seen. And today, once again, the Royal Exchange takes centre stage for this historic moment.
Sonali, thank you. We will be back to you shortly while Robert's still with me and David Olshoga is with me too. And these proclamations, again, this is all part of this very traditional, going back to ancient times, spreading the news that we have a new monarch right around the nation.
Spreading the news across the nation, spreading it very significantly to the City of London. And I think what we're seeing today is something we sometimes forget. There are these layers of tradition. There is the city, the corporation, the livery companies, the guilds, and sometimes it's all kind of hidden behind the scenes. And this is a moment when we are reminded that there are these layers of tradition and protocol that are very often hidden beyond view, which today are out in the open.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk about the Commonwealth as well, because this clearly extends to the Commonwealth. The King, his new role, what sort of role, what sort of leadership do you think he will bring?
Well, I think he's been very sober about the Commonwealth. Last year in November we saw Barbados move away from having the late Queen as head of state, and King Charles, I think, has very cleverly made it clear that such moves might happen in the future, and that is the choice of those nations. I think it's true that both Jamaica and Belize are going to have referendums to see if they are going to choose King Charles as the head of state. I think it is difficult to imagine that when the reign of Charles comes to an end sometime, probably hopefully in the long future, that there will still be 14 nations who will also share the same head of state as Britain.
And that was the Queen's, one of the Queen's great achievements, wasn't it? The bringing together of the Commonwealth.
Yeah, I mean, she essentially presided over the greatest exercise in decolonisation, really, we've ever seen. She were 8 members of the Commonwealth when she came to the throne. Now there are 56. I mean, just this year they welcomed 2 new members who weren't even part of what used to be called the British Empire, Togo and Gabon, were part of the French Commonwealth. So it's totally changed on her watch. But as David says, within those 56, there are these 14 other nations, apart from this one, who have the monarch as their head of state. And that relationship may change. I mean, these things evolve. It changed during the Queen's reign. I mean, there were countries before Barbados, but I mean Mauritius, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, these were countries that did have the monarch as their head of state and decided to forge a different path and become republics, but at the same time remaining very enthusiastic members of the Commonwealth. So that may happen. But let's not forget that actually during the Queen's reign there were votes, there were referenda, most recently in the Caribbean, in St Vincent and the Grenadines in 2009, a vote, shall we hang on to the Queen or move away? And they decided to keep the monarchy in Australia in '99. So I thought it was really interesting in the King's personal declaration we heard just now that he sort of specifically referenced that. He talked about how he would be guided by his electorates in his other nations. It was very much a coded reference to it's your call. You know, this is not a monarchy clinging on. This is, you asked us to be head of state, we're very happy to do that, but it's your call and we will do entirely what you say and vote for.
How much change do you think we could see then over the next few years, decades?
Well, I think this is where the longevity and the enormous respect of the late Queen is critical to understand. Those nations also, for 70 years, have had the same person as their head of state. They found their independence while she was Queen. So they've only known not a range of British monarchs, but one Queen as their head of state. And I think that passing of the Queen, I think, will bring about a moment of change. I think people who would like to see elected head of state in Australia, for example, will quite soon begin conversations, begin discussions about that. And as I said, I would be very surprised if we didn't see fewer countries sharing a head of state.
I think Dave's entirely right. I would be very surprised cometh the next time we undergo an accession council if there are 14 other realms. But what Prince Charles said in the past when he was Prince Charles, what he underlined today as king, is this must be amicable. This must be entirely the will of the people, and he is their servant. He is our servant, and he will do as a constitutional monarch must do. And I think all he will be concerned about is that as these constitutional upheavals come about, that they're done in a spirit entirely of goodwill. And we saw that in Barbados, didn't we, last year when there was the transition there. And he went over for that. And it was done with exceptional grace on all sides, and I think he sees, the important thing is the Commonwealth. It's not whether he's king of X or king of Y, it's the fact that the Commonwealth continues and remains strong.
And there is such deep affection for his late mother, isn't there? And we saw an extraordinary reaction, the tributes that were paid to the Queen from right around the world, from presidents, from leaders of so many countries, speaking very heartfelt statements about what they meant to her.
Yeah, President Macron of France, he made that point. She's not a queen, she's the queen, and she actually has her own entry now in the German language, the official German dictionary, as well as die Königin, which is a normal word for a queen. There's another word in there, die Queen, and it says afterwards there is no plural.
Really. And President Macron spoke of the emptiness that he said that people felt now that she has gone. Let's talk briefly about what will happen next, because we have, of course, the state funeral that will take place shortly. We don't know yet when. And then the coronation of the new king, that is some time off, isn't it? Because the Queen's coronation was a full year later, more than a year later.
Yeah, it was a year and a half, because at the time Britain was bomb-scarred on rations. Churchill famously said, we can't have coronations with bailiffs in the house, as he saw it. I mean, Britain really just wasn't ready. Whereas now I think there will be, speed is of the essence. I think they'll want to get on with it. Rather like when his grandfather, George VI, came to the throne. They didn't, it was a matter of months. And in fact, the Privy Council we saw today, they will have to approve a coronation committee to get all this underway. I mean, there's all sorts of rubric involved, but essentially, that comes next. But no one's really thinking about that at the moment, because for the next few days, obviously, the focus is on paying tribute and honour to the Queen. That will be the focus of all the sort of the statecraft that we see for now. But I did again in his declaration. There was business there. He alluded to the fact he will maintain the tradition of surrendering the revenues of the Crown Estate to the government. I mean, that's not normally what wasn't in the Queen's personal declaration in '52. But I think that was a sort of pointed way of saying that the finances continue, and the sovereign grant, I mean, which is the new way of funding the monarchy, that's only been in place for 12 years, and he made reference to that. So it's been a morning of great ritual and ceremony. But I mean, in there is a lot of contemporary business.
And we are currently in the middle of these proclamations, the principal proclamation at 11 o'clock, the next proclamation, which will take place in the City of London at 12 o'clock. And just to explain to you as well, that if you are looking outside, you see public buildings where flags until today have flown at half-mast, they should be at full mast now, because for a very short period of time between the proclamations, the first proclamation, and tomorrow, when the proclamations continue right around the United Kingdom, the flags on public buildings will be at full mast. And after that, they are then going to be lowered to half mast again in memory, in honour of the Queen. Well, we will go now to the City of London again, and Sonali Shah, who is watching as proceedings edge ever closer to the next proclamation at midday. Sonali.
Sophie, we're starting to hear the bands here, and the crowds have just been watching the Common Councillors gather and walk and process towards the Royal Exchange for that proclamation. And joining me ahead of that proclamation is one of the clerks of one of the city's livery companies, those old merchants, the original merchants, the worshipful company of grocers, Brigadier Grenville Bob Bibby. It's such a significant day, isn't it, today, during a period of national mourning for the whole country. It's such a significant day for the City of London.
It really is, Sonali, and it's an extraordinary relationship the city enjoys with the monarch, which dates back right to 1066, when William invaded the country and defeated the English army at the Battle of Hastings. When he got to London, he thought he probably wouldn't take London on, and they came up with a deal, and we had the City of London Charter. From that point on, the City of London has had its independence since 1067.
And how has that special relationship between the Crown and the City of London developed over the years?
Oh, hugely. I mean, there are sort of three pillars, if you like, to the running of this country, and it is the government, the monarch, and the City of London, and the three have always have worked in various ways through history. Sometimes it's been positive and other times less positive, but hugely significant, and that relationship has developed throughout the years, where now the monarch is fully, if you like, embraced with the City of London. You mentioned the fact that I'm a clerk to a livery company. Well, King Charles III is a member of 7 livery companies. He was granted the freedom of the City of London in 1971, as are all his siblings.
So many people here are also here giving their thoughts on Her Majesty the Queen, remembering her. I know you met her. What are your memories of her?
Well, as a soldier, I was fortunate enough to meet Her Majesty. Indeed, she awarded me the CBE. But I think my fondest memory is when I was invited to lunch. I had carried the flag, the colour, on the Queen's birthday parade, her official birthday. And she invited all those surviving officers who had carried the flag from the Grenadier Guards to join her for lunch in Buckingham Palace in 1991. And I well remember leaving the dining room. I didn't sit next to her at lunch, but once we moved into the drawing room, I found myself stood next to the Queen. And I thought, well, I'll probably talk to her for 2 or 3 minutes, or she'll talk to me. 20 minutes later, I was still stood there thinking, this is surreal. And she was absolutely remarkable. I think my the abiding memory is when she took her lipstick out and put her lipstick on. And then she was very worried about the fact I didn't have a cup of coffee.
Just showing the kind of person that she was. Going forward, King Charles III has been building his relationship with the city and indeed the nation for so long now.
Yes, I think you asked me about King Charles III going forward, but the band of the Grenadier Guards are making it very difficult to hear what you're saying, which is quite timely. But yes, I mean, of course, King Charles has had a relationship, if you like, with this country for over 70 years and is already given 70 plus years dedicated service to this country. And again, I've seen him bring all sorts of people into the room for the good of others. Worked in Middlesbrough with him, with the local authorities, with the police, and he is a remarkable man. He's truly dedicated, and I believe he's going to be a truly great king.
And I've seen him already charm people in the city at various dinners before he became king, and I'm sure that will continue. Thank you so much for talking to us on such an important day, a special day for the City of London. Thank you.
Sonali, thank you. Well, Lord Simon Woolley is with me again, and Robert Hardman as well. And wonderful pageantry there, right in the very heart of London. But the significance of the City of London to the monarchy is huge, isn't it?
It is. I mean, monarchs in the past, I mean, they needed the city to fund their wars, and they needed the money. They needed that influence that they have, and all through the Queen's reign, the city played a key part whenever there were state visits. Part of the state visit would be to take the state visitor to the City of London. The sort of the essence of economic power, and some of the Queen's most memorable speeches, her famous Anna Cerebelis speech, she made as a guest of the city to mark the 40th anniversary of her reign. But it was great to see again there some of that pageantry that we normally only see at the Lord Mayor's show in November. And they had to, in the same way they took a window out at the palace, they had to take a coffee bar out to make way for this at the Royal Exchange.
And look at that. I mean, that really is the wonderful. I mean, this stretches back centuries, doesn't it? It really does.
They've got their own court.
And there they all are taking place. So they're coming over from Mansion House up to the Royal Exchange, which is where the proclamation will be held. And Lord Woolley, we are seeing a current day modern proclamation being made, 2022, but something that does stretch back centuries. What do you think this modern monarchy will look like?
I think it will be a modern king. And one looking to bring people in, to give them a great sense of belonging. I mean, I've just come back from Malaysia, and I was told by the royal family there that when he came in 2017, that he was a great convener, bringing people together, disparate individuals, and they still talk about it today. And of course, I also saw that in Barbados. When I joined him for the Republic celebrations, that the people of Barbados looked up to him and admired him for his stance on.
And you were very struck by that personally, weren't you?
Particularly struck. I've got Bajan heritage, and we had a new voice, and I think that he said this This is your country, finding your own voice. And I think him and the Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, have become good friends. She said some wonderful things about him today, saying he'll be a good king. He'll be a king for the disadvantaged. He'll be a king for all people. And I think a lot of people around the world have had calls from Reverend Jesse Jackson, Reverend Al Sharpton, conveying congratulations to this moment.
A wonderful mix of the old and the new. Will the new monarch, Robert Hardman, do you think he will try to modernise the monarchy anymore?
I think we're seeing signs, Sophie, of that all the time. We'll see it perhaps later today when some of these very early meetings of the reign, we will see photographs and footage of that. I think we'll just see in the days ahead a different style. I mean, the essence of constitutional monarchy is not going to change one bit. But he, as we mentioned earlier, he is the longest serving heir to the throne. So that Privy Council that met there, he's older than most of them. He knows more about public life. He's been in public life for longer than almost any of them. He started in the 60s as he became Prince of Wales. So he has this body of experience. He's probably met everybody in that room. And it provides a very different sort of atmosphere to the start of this reign. He is the avuncular voice of experience rather than the new young monarch.
How much does his life really change, though? I mean, there are small details, or there may be big details, like he loses his passport, doesn't he?
Yes.
No passport, no driving licence. The monarch does not have that.
And eventually he will have to move into Buckingham Palace, which monarchs never like doing very much. I mean, it might be big and smart and famous, but he's very happy at Clarence House. His mother, when the Queen became Queen, she and Prince Philip really tried very hard to remain at Clarence House, and Churchill said, "No, I'm sorry, monarchs live above the shop." They were effectively turfed out and told to move down the road, and that's sort of coming his way.
No, great. It's great to see the transition, and I think that a lot of people around the world will be watching, this pomp that I think we do particularly well. It's just great to see it.
So there they are, the parties taking their places, and what we will hear first is the trumpeters, I think, there are two sets of trumpeters, one at Mansion House and one here at the Royal Exchange, and the trumpeters will echo around, they will echo each other ahead of this next proclamation.
City is seldom this busy on a Saturday.
And great that so many people are able to go out and see it. I mean, there are huge crowds already. There have been a lot of people coming into central London since the death of the Queen. Thousands of people have been down at the gates of Buckingham Palace.
They have. I've been down there. The numbers, I think, are starting to surprise the authorities. I think they're starting to perhaps rethink how they're going to handle the next few days, because after the deaths of Diana, Princess of Wales, after the death of the Queen Mother in 2002, there were very substantial crowds. But it was it took a while. People gradually, gathered their thoughts, and it took some days before we see the sort of numbers that we've seen right away here. But it's not really surprising. I mean, the Queen has touched the lives of everybody, and not just in this country, but around the world. I mean, what we've started to see as of yesterday, people are now starting to fly in. I mean, initially you had a big international crowd outside the palace of people who just happened to be in London. Now people are getting on planes. They want to come and pay their respects.
They want to share in this moment.
Yes, because she's been their queen too.
Of our national pride, national stability, and I would say a global role model. This duty to public service. I was watching that documentary about the Queen when she said that service is sacrifice, and I would like to think that some of our politicians today could learn a thing or two about dedicated service.
But you touched on it earlier, Lord William. I thought I was fascinated by your remarks about how Prince Charles, well, he's Prince Charles now, the King, asked you round for a half-hour chat, turned into a 2-hour chat. And what I've always found, interviewing people around who've met him, is there's follow-through. Right. I once followed him around Toxteth, I remember, and there were terrible riots in Toxteth in 1981. This was more than 30 years later. And everybody there remembered him, and he was the only public figure who'd been there in 1981 who still was coming back. Everybody else had either retired or died.
An extraordinary sensibility. That I'd been in my college at Homerton for 5 minutes, relatively speaking, and I got a letter from the Clarence House saying that would I like the Prince to come and visit? Let me think about this. Yes. So and he came, and we were walking around the grounds with the students, and he stopped and chatted, and his aide was saying, "So we need to move on," but he just stayed. He stayed and shook hands, and he was telling this. He was asking the students. He said, "You've been given too many essays to write." They loved it. They loved it, and it's that little touch that you can't buy. You just have to have it, and he has it in spade loads.
Well, while they are getting ready at the Royal Exchange, we're going to go straight back to St James's Palace now, because the Privy Council has been leaving the throne room where we saw them earlier. They've all been signing those documents, and Clive Murray is there now with one of them.
Yeah, hi there, Sophie. The crowds have gone, the guardsmen have gone, but I'm pleased to say Baroness Scotland is with me, Secretary General of the Commonwealth. It's good to see you. Thanks for being with us. I wonder if you could just paint a picture of what it was like in there, reaching that momentous decision.
Well, I think this is an historic moment. 70 years we've had the grace of having Her Majesty the Queen on the throne. So there was a feeling of sadness because she was no longer our sovereign queen, she'd gone, but also a feeling of sober anticipation that the new king was about to have the whole burden now passed on to him. And so a number of people were feeling honoured to be there. There was frisson around the room when you looked around and you saw our history laid out in that room. We had the Lords Spiritual, the Lords Legal, and the Lords in terms of government, and all of the former prime ministers, and it was quite a surreal moment, because in that room was captured 70 years of her reign, and every single one of us was really conscious this was a privilege. And for me, representing as I do the 56 countries of the Commonwealth, that's 2.5 billion people, 60% of whom are under the age of 30. And I can tell you, everyone wanted to be in that room. So I was very conscious that as I stood there, I was trying to represent all of those who wanted to be there but couldn't be there. So I think everyone felt privileged and sober in terms of this is an extraordinary moment, and willing for every single participant to really do their best. And they did. Everyone stepped up. And so I think it's a great honour to have been part of it.
I wonder as well, given the Queen's relationship with the Commonwealth, how well she pushed it and cajoled it and kept it together. What are your thoughts now with King Charles III and his leadership of the Commonwealth?
Well, I think one of the most wonderful things is, as you've said, is that Her Majesty the Queen loved the Commonwealth. And the Commonwealth loved her. This wasn't just her being Queen of the United Kingdom. They loved her as being head of the Commonwealth. And what we're really lucky about is that Prince Charles has been on that journey with his mother since the moment he came into being. I mean, he travelled with her. He's been all around our Commonwealth. And of course, on so many occasions recently, he has been the one who has carried that flag of the Commonwealth for her. He was there in Kigali for our last Commonwealth heads of meeting, heads of government meeting. And what was so extraordinary, he was there in a double capacity. One, as representative of the Queen, but also as the incoming head of the Commonwealth. And that was very special. And people loved him, absolutely loved him.
All right, well, he's got, we all hope, a long reign ahead of him. Baroness Scotland, a pleasure to see you. Thank you for joining us, for giving us a little bit of what it was like inside
thank you very
that
much.
meeting. Thank you so much. And Sophie, with that, it's back to you.
Clive, thank you. Lovely to hear the events of earlier on, which took place at St James's Palace. Now the focus very much on the City of London and the Royal Exchange. And Sonali Shah is there for us now. Sonali.
There is now a buzz in the air here, crowds here in their thousands watching parts of the procession go on to the Royal Exchange as it prepares for that procession. I've been talking to a few members of the crowd, people talking about that mix of old and new, how yes, the nation is in mourning, but they feel like they've been able to get on with their lives. They were glad that transport hadn't stopped so they could get here today. They want to be here to witness the proclamation, and then they're off to the theatre. A family from Denmark here on holiday by coincidence, saying they are absolutely never going to forget their visit to London. We've got the Newtons here from West Sussex, 3 generations of Newtons. Why was it important to you to come here? The first day off, I guess, from school and from work?
Yeah, it was the first day off, and Jack really wanted to lay some flowers for the Queen, so we decided to come up today. So we've got those, and our daughter just said that the proclamation from the King was coming here today, so we thought we'd come here, and here we are.
And Nan, I hear a rumour that you're just old enough to remember the coronation, the last coronation.
Watching the last coronation, her coronation, on the telly with my family, granddad and grandmother and mum and dad and brothers and sisters. And
the Queen must have meant so much to you, and you are here for that moment in history, and it's felt like that, hasn't it, here? And I hope it's felt like that at home too.
Sonali, thank you. Well, we are getting closer to that moment. We could perhaps stay on those pictures, and you can see what is happening there on the steps of Mansion House. The alterations, as you were saying, Robert Hardman, that have been made today to these ancient buildings, the Royal Exchange, where the steps of where this proclamation will take place, the Royal Exchange, which was the centre of commerce, wasn't it, in the sort of 16th century?
It absolutely was. It was a meeting place. It was a sort of there was a great hubbub there all the time. It was a place for gossip, and deals were struck. And there's still an element of that to this day, as I was saying earlier. I mean, there's normally where we're looking at now, there's a sort of, this time of year, there's a sort of alfresco coffee shop there full of city workers creeping away from their computer screens. But I mean, today we are transported back to the age of Dick Whittington, really, aren't we?
And now we're replaced by the pikemen, the Honourable Artillery Company, and we've got the trumpeters there, the state trumpeters, who we will see in a moment, 4 of them, who will be standing on the steps, and very much a follow-on from what we saw an hour ago at St James's Palace. We will hear the trumpeters. That proclamation will be made. I was struck when we saw it on the balcony at St James's. It was almost, it's parchment, it looked like, that they read it from. It really was a very old piece of paper.
And it's now becoming so familiar. You know, we've now heard it twice. If your viewers would have heard it, you know, we heard the clerk of the council read it out, saying, "This is what we're going to say. Is that all right?" The council go, "Yep, that's fine." And then we heard Garter King of Arms read it out. Now we're going to hear it in the city, and it's gradually, you know, in the very old way, in the sense it's being disseminated around the kingdom.
Tom Shabir, having worked very closely with Prince Charles, and you do know him very well, how do you think he will be coping with this change, with the shock of the death of his mother, because it did happen very suddenly, and this new role that he is having to take on? He knew it was coming, but still the reality must be very different.
I think he'll be quite calm about it. He's had a long time to think about it. He knows how to do it. It's sad, tragic for him, but he'll be calm and he'll be getting on with it and thinking of the next thing.
And will he want to be a monarch who is very much more so than others in public view? Because we've already seen him a lot. He's been filmed, they've made footage available.
Yes, he's been in public view as a Prince of Wales, and much of it very much in a world view. I was lucky enough to be with him when President Mandela visited this country, and he visited South Africa with President Mandela, and rather famously the Spice Girls, and these flurry of activities which come upon you, and I'd panic, but he's not a panicker. He'll be fine.
How much difference will it make to his life, his roles, his work at charity, the Prince's Trust, which is what you worked for, and he has put so much effort into? He has already said he will have to step back from a lot of that, won't he?
He's already stepped back, and there's a new relationship with those charities, and that will change. I'm uncertain where William and others will fit in, but the work will go on. He just won't be the active executive chairman that he has been for the past 30 years. He's got a new priority. It's a different style of work. It's hard work, and he knows that there's a lot resting on his shoulders. But he's known that for a while.
But that charity work that he did, the Prince's Trust, I've seen up myself up front, the work that he put into that and how passionate he was about that. But he is having to step back from all of that now.
Yes, I mean, thank you very much, Sophie. In case viewers didn't know, you were an ambassador for us and very good at it. It involved a lot of hard work running a thing like that. He grew it when I was first appointed we raised maybe £1 million a year. When I left, and he was stepping back a little, we were raising £1 million a week. And spending wisely £1 million a week is hard work, and you've got to be creative. He was a driving force in the creativity front. Most of the things we did came right off his pen. I've met X. Could you go and see them? I think we might have a good idea. And all you've heard before, Black Lives Matter and related things, that's him driving it forward. And of course that now stops because he must do other things as the king, and he will.
And what you're seeing now on your screens is the Royal Exchange and the Honourable Artillery Company waiting for the procession to take their places. The trumpeters already there, the state trumpeters, and that proclamation which will be read in about 10 minutes' time. For the new king, Robert Hardman, he is going to have to change quite a lot, isn't he? Because we know that he has been a man who has been passionate and very open about what is important to him. We never knew what the Queen thought. We very rarely heard from her. We've heard a lot from the Prince already.
We have. In his days as Prince, he had to make a decision early on. He knew he'd be a very old king because he could tell, will I let my life be defined by my reign, which won't come till I'm very old? No, my life will be defined by my time as Prince of Wales. And he's, as Tom has said, he's been unlike any other Prince of Wales in history. He has, rather than sit around waiting, if you like, he's carved out an extraordinary role for himself, one that never existed. This charity that Tom brilliantly ran, the Prince's Trust, which started with the contents of his Royal Navy pension, when he left the Navy in the 70s, and became the biggest charitable network in Britain. And he loves following around the country. Oh, hang on.
The echoing fanfare from Mansion House over to the Royal Exchange.
Brother James! Brother James! Chan!
And the Clarenceau King of Arms in that procession, making its way towards the steps of the Royal Exchange. Timothy Duke, the Clarenceau King of Arms, and he's accompanied there by heralds in their ancient outfits and heralds. Again, Robert, such a link with the distant past. Those heralds, which were their job, messengers, weren't they? They were messengers for the monarch, sent to convey messages or make proclamations right around the kingdom.
and they are based at the College of Arms, literally a short walk from where we're witnessing these scenes now. And they're still they're the sort of the custodians of heraldry, of coats of arms, of aspects of history that perhaps we don't always think about so much these days. But it's part of the fabric of Britain and the history that sort of anchors us. And they do appear at events like the state opening of Parliament, and we will see them several times in the days ahead, led by the Earl Marshal, the Duke of Norfolk, who is the man who will ultimately be in charge of the coronation.
And we saw there as well, I'm sure we will see again, the Lord Mayor of London, Vincent Keaveney, also central in that procession as it heads towards the steps there at the Royal Exchange. It is very rare, isn't it, that we see this level of history, of pageantry, spill out onto the streets of London like this.
It is. I mean, and we'll see it in Edinburgh, particularly in the days to come, and then back in London. It's a reminder of these roles that all they have a purpose. I mean, some of their uniforms and their regalia may look out of place, but these are all, functioning public servants, and as is often said, nobody does pageantry quite like this country, and I think today is a case in point.
The Lord Mayor there walking up the steps, the great mace being carried behind him. And it does very much echo back the history of the importance of the City of London and the monarchy and the role that the Lord Mayor plays, because he takes precedence over everyone else except the monarch.
Yes, and the order of precedence sort of list of the most important people in the realm. Monarchs have always known that they can't do much without the help of the city, so better keep the city on side.
So everyone taking their places, and these proclamations, this is the second one that we will have heard today, and they continue tomorrow, don't they? They continue right around the kingdom. There will be more.
We'll hear one in Edinburgh tomorrow, and I think also, we're getting further announcements later today actually about what will unfold over the days ahead. But certainly Scotland is next in line for, and of course there's a different sort of heraldic body up there led by the Court of the Lord Lion. So again, we'll be discovering aspects of the sort of the machinery of the state that we don't really see very often, but which should nonetheless still play a key part in these constitutional moments.
And complete silence there in the City of London is very rare. That is a very busy part of London, isn't it? Very rare to hear no noise at all. Everyone waiting for the moment when this second proclamation will be read by the Clarenceux King of Arms. That's Timothy Duke. He's one of the three heralds who are the King of Arms. And the Lord Mayor of London, what a year for him. It's a one-year position, isn't it? It's held for just 1 year, but his year has included the Jubilee, the 70th anniversary of the Queen's reign, and now a new king
It is, as you say, it's these roles come around every year. The Lord Mayor's show is part of that rotation. And whereas some of the other sort of offices of state, if you like, well, they're occupied for years. People can sort of plan them for years, but Lord Mayor never knows what's going to happen on his or her watch. And as you say, I mean, to have a jubilee and those extraordinary scenes at St Paul's Cathedral back in June, when again the city played its key part in the jubilee celebrations, and now, of course, a completely different atmosphere. But once again, this sort of ancient economic hub of the nation playing its key part in a very important moment.
The trumpeters echoing around the city of London.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to his mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We therefore, the Lord Spiritual and Temple of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of Her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London, and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, Head of the Commonwealth, Defender of the Faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless his majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. Given at St James's Palace this 10th day of September in the year of our Lord 2022. God save the King. God save the King.
3 cheers for His Majesty the King. Hip hip, hooray! Hip hip, hooray! Hip hip, hooray!
A huge cheer, a huge round of applause from the crowd there watching the second proclamation of the day that has just taken place at the Royal Exchange. And watching all that as it was happening, and watching as the procession now departs and heads back towards Mansion House, is Sonali Shah. Let's join her now.
What a moment of history here at the Royal Exchange. The silence, that's what you could really hear, the silence of thousands as they watched the proclamation. And then, as the last words were said, they were echoed by everyone around here. And the national anthem, you know, for many of these people, for most of these people, this will be the first time they have sung the new national anthem. And that was very, very moving. A lot of people with their hands on their hearts, a few tears I've seen in the crowd over here. And people are here with a heavy heart. They want to remember Her Majesty the Queen. They are talking about their memories of her, but they also want to welcome the new king. And then when those cheers came, you could hear the cheers and the echo of the cheers ripple through the city of London here. It's been quite a moment for everyone. And so many people here talking about how they had to come here today to witness history in the making.
Sonali, thank you. The colour, the pageantry, the history that we have just seen take place there in London today, and that will continue tomorrow, Robert Harmon, won't it, across the country?
It will. In the time-honoured tradition, from here there'll be major proclamations in the capitals of the devolved nations, in Edinburgh and Cardiff and Belfast. But then it rather like it did in the old days, if one can say that, it will be read on cathedral steps in county towns, and then from there it will be proclamations by local authorities up and down the country. So although we're obviously seeing the City of London here, it's not just a London event by any means. You know, wherever you are around the country, perhaps tomorrow there will be that proclamation being delivered to a local community, and that's as it always has been.
It is all about, David Olusoga, it is all about the continuity. Monarchy, it keeps going. We have had the death of the monarch very, very recently, but the passage keeps continuing, doesn't it? The crown is being handed on very quickly.
It is almost hard to believe that it is 48 hours since the passing of the Queen, because things have happened so quickly. Of course, in the age of absolute monarchs, there was very dangerous reasons why you would want accession to be confirmed, to be proclaimed, and to be unquestioned. I think what we're seeing here are traditions that we forgot we had. If you lived in the first half of the 20th century, you would have seen, if I've got my maths right, 4 passings of monarchs through death and abdication. You would have witnessed this in a much more less direct way 4 times. 70 years since these traditions were enacted. So it is reminding us of these layers of tradition that we've just forgotten about. And it is remarkable to see them. I'm looking at the trumpeters and I'm thinking they've marched from the Royal College of Arms. Well, in the Royal College of Arms is a vellum roll of the 1511 Westminster tournament, which has royal trumpeters on it. So this sense of continuity, I mean, we are talking centuries and centuries.
But also, this has all been gathered together at incredibly short notice.
Well, I think we all heard rumours about how well planned things were, Operation London Bridge and Operation Unicorn. Well, I think we can now see the fruits of all of that detailed, careful planning. But of course, it has happened very quickly, very rapidly. That's why it's so shocking. So I think it's, we're seeing the fruits of that that preparation, but we're also seeing real dynamism by the authorities to make this happen so quickly.
I just think it underlines the if you like, the allure, there's some sort of almost primeval power of monarchy. It may be unfashionable to say so, but we have actually in our last lifetime, we have seen another monarch buried. I remember just a few years ago witnessing the funeral of Richard III in Leicester after he was discovered under a car park. And of course nobody knew him. He was a much demonised king. Nobody could possibly care two hoots about him. It was over 500 years ago. And yet, as his coffin came through on a gun carriage through the streets of Leicester, it was absolutely extraordinary. A sort of silence fell. And his funeral took place in the cathedral, and there was a sort of reverence accorded to this man is alleged sort of child murderer from hundreds of years ago, and yet this was a king. This was someone who is who's part of our history, and our reigns and our monarchs. They form the sort of punctuation marks, don't they, in our national story? And it's at times like this that we recognise that.
And I think irrespective of your views on constitutional monarchy, the rights and wrongs of a hereditary position, this is history. Irrespective of your views on it, this is part of our history, and we're seeing it enacted today.
I think we have had an idea as well of what is to come at the funeral of the Queen Mother. And when she lay in state, I remember well, I remember going in there and walking past her coffin. It was in the middle of the night, and the extraordinary atmosphere, and the thousands of people who turned out to file past her coffin. And that is going to happen again, isn't it? That is going to happen for the Queen.
It really is, and I think that they have to give some thought as to how they manage that, because with the Queen Mother, the queues got so long. At one point, it was a 24-hour queue. I remember having to take a taxi to go to the end of the queue to talk to someone at the back and saying, "You do realise you're going to be queuing for 24 hours?" And they went, "Yeah, well, we've got snacks," and they queued through the night, and it was something. It was hundreds of thousands of people who wanted to pay their respects, and some people are old enough to remember doing that for Winston Churchill. How the millions who are going to want to pay their respects to the Queen. Well, anyway, that's a matter for another day. But I mean, everyone right around the world, but I'm sure millions, tens of millions of people in this country are going to want to say that they paid their respects.
And it will be, Elizabeth, for the family as well, a deeply private moment, although it will be played out very publicly, won't it? My darling Mama is is how the new king referred to the Queen in his public address yesterday.
And he had such a close relationship to her, and it was so special and important to him. But do you know what I was reflecting just now? This is so much focused on London inevitably today, but only in my village in East Sussex yesterday, the bell ringers came together to toll the bell for an hour, to ring the bells for an hour. There were people coming to the churches. This will be happening across the country. It's not just about urban centres. There are people in their own villages and their hamlets coming together. And that matters. And the Prince of Wales, as he was, the king now, was one of the greatest champions for the countryside. There's such a strong bond there. So as much as we've heard today about his remarkable work in inner cities and bringing people together, and Black Lives Matter and all these important issues, he was the voice of the countryside. And the Queen Consort is too. They're great countrymen. They truly understand that part of the United Kingdom, which is so special. It's 70% of this country is the countryside, and that matters.
And it is going to be a very strange few days, week or so now, isn't it? Because there is still this shock about the transition, about what has happened.
I think people will there'll be little things that just sort of trigger it. Everyone will go about their lives and probably go back to work on Monday. And then suddenly there'll just be something, you'll see a postbox and it says E2R, and you're suddenly thinking, hang on, it's now C3R. I was looking at the state trumpeters there, their magnificent tunics, all that embroidery. I mean, at some point, there's a lot of sewing coming up, because someone's got to, redo that. All, if you think where E2R is, just the Queen's cipher, the Queen's imagery, her face is the most reproduced image, arguably, in history, because of all the coins and banks and banknotes and stamps in all her various realms over 70 years. And suddenly all that's going to change. And we just one day we'll reach into your purse and go, oh, good heavens, look, there's the king.
A final word from you, David?
It's interesting. I think it obviously is going to change, the banknotes, the stamps. But, I mean, after the passing of Queen Victoria, there was a flurry of naming things after Queen Victoria. And I think there will be another way in which Elizabeth II is printed on the country, even allowing Charles to take his rightful place on coins and notes.
Well, thank you all very much for joining me this morning as we witnessed history, an extraordinary moment not seen ever before in our lifetimes. What we witnessed, we were very fortunate to see it. Thank you all for being with me. So much change, so much upheaval in such a short space of time. A new Prime Minister, a new cabinet, the death of a Queen, a constant for 70 years in all our lives. And this morning we have just witnessed the proclamation of the new King, King Charles III. We are at the start of many days of mourning, but also this is the beginning of a new chapter as the crown is passed from king, from queen to king, as it has been down the centuries. King Charles III, a new monarch and a new beginning. Goodbye.
Cheers for His Majesty the King.